The first time my niece Jessica said it, I tried to let the words roll off my back, like water off the old tin roof of my porch. "Aunt Alina," she'd said, her voice dripping with a kind of pity that felt sharper than any insult, "I just don't know how you can live in this place. It's so historic." She had paused, her perfectly glossed lips twisting into a small, tight smile. And not in the charming way. We were standing in my living room, the same living room my late husband Robert and I had painted a soft buttercup yellow 3 decades ago. The sunlight was streaming through the wavy, original glass of the windows, illuminating the faint, hairline cracks in the plaster and the worn spots on the hardwood floor where generations of footsteps had smoothed the varnish away. To me, these weren't imperfections. They were marks of a life well lived, a map of memories etched into the very bones of the house. This was the spot where Robert had knelt to propose. That scuff mark near the fireplace was from our son, Michael, learning to ride his first tricycle indoors on a rainy Saturday. Every corner held a ghost of a happy moment, but Jessica didn't see ghosts. She saw decay. She saw a house that was hopelessly, embarrassingly out of date. Her eyes, the same bright blue as her mother's, my sister Margaret's, swept over the room with a clinical detachment. They lingered on my comfortable, slightly sagging floral sofa, the one Robert and I had picked out together, and I saw her internally compare it to the sleek, gray, minimalist furniture that populated her own cavernous living room in the new Maple Creek Estates development across town. That day, I had just smiled and offered her another slice of my homemade apple pie. "It suits me, dear," I'd said, my voice betraying none of the sting her words had left behind. "It's a comfortable old house, full of good memories." Jessica had taken the pie, of course. She never refused a free meal, but her smile hadn't reached her eyes. "Well, as long as you're happy," she'd conceded, as if my happiness in such surroundings was a strange and baffling phenomenon, something to be studied but never understood. That was 6 months ago. The comments had only grown more frequent, more pointed since then. They came cloaked in the guise of concern, wrapped in the language of love, but they were barbs all the same. "Aunt Alina, that wallpaper is peeling. You really should let me get you a quote from my decorator. Are you sure that wiring is safe? A house this old could be a fire hazard. We'd love to have you over for Christmas, but honestly, I'd be a little embarrassed for my friends to see where you live if they had to drop you off." Each comment chipped away at me. It wasn't the criticism of the house that truly hurt. Robert and I had built our lives here with our own 4 hands. We had poured our love and our sweat into these walls. It was a sturdy, honest house, and I knew its worth. The real pain came from the source of the criticism. This was Jessica, my only niece. The little girl I had babysat, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose bedtime stories I had read until my voice was hoarse. The girl whose college application essays I had helped her write, right at the sturdy oak dining table she now seemed to despise. I had always tried to be a source of stability and love in her life, especially after my own son, Michael, moved across the country. My sister Margaret, bless her heart, had always been a bit of a dreamer, her head often in the clouds. It was I who had been the practical one, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, the one who set up a small savings bond for Jessica when she was born, adding to it every year without fail. And for years, I had done more than that. Much more. Something no one in the family, not even Margaret, fully understood. The breaking point, the moment the dam of my patience finally cracked and gave way, came last Sunday. It was a beautiful autumn afternoon, and the family had gathered at my house for an impromptu potluck. Margaret had brought a salad, and Jessica and her husband, Tom, had arrived with a store-bought dessert and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill. They had been married for 2 years, and their life seemed to be a whirlwind of upward mobility. Tom had a good job in finance, and Jessica had recently quit her part-time job to focus on what she called household management and personal branding, which seemed to primarily involve posting pictures of their new house and expensive dinners on social media. I had just pulled a pan of my famous honey-glazed chicken from the oven when Jessica walked into the kitchen. She leaned against the doorframe, careful not to let her cream-colored cashmere sweater brush against the painted wood. "Smells delicious, Aunt Alina," she said, though her eyes were, as usual, scanning the room for flaws. They settled on my old gas stove, a vintage O'Keefe and Merit that still worked like a charm. I'm amazed that old thing still heats up. We just had a smart oven installed. I can preheat it from my phone on my way home from the gym. It's a lifesaver. Well, this old thing has been a lifesaver for 40 years, I replied, my voice a little tighter than I intended. It's never let me down. I suppose, she said, her tone unconvinced. She drifted over to the window that looked out onto my back garden, a riot of late-blooming roses and chrysanthemums. You know, Tom and I were talking. We finally closed on the landscape contract for our backyard. It's going to be incredible. A full outdoor kitchen, a fire pit, even a small waterfall feature. The contractor said it will really elevate the property value. That sounds lovely, dear, I said, basting the chicken. She turned from the window, and her gaze fell upon the small, framed photograph on my countertop. It was a picture of me and Robert, taken 20 years ago, standing proudly in front of this very house, a paintbrush in his hand and a smudge of white paint on my nose. We were so young, so full of plans. Jessica picked it up. You two were so cute, she said. Then she sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. It's just such a shame you never, upgraded. You could have had so much more. A house like ours, in a neighborhood with a good HOA, think of the equity you missed out on. She placed the photo back down, her finger tracing a crack in the old linoleum countertop. Honestly, I worry about you here all alone. It's just so sad. Sad, the word hung in the air, thick and heavy. It landed not like a bucket of ice water, but like a slow, seeping poison. All the years of quiet support, of love given freely and without expectation, of sacrifices she could never possibly comprehend, all of it was reduced to that single, pitying word. Sad. My hand, holding the basting brush, began to tremble. I set it down on the spoon rest with a clatter that was louder than I intended. The room was suddenly very quiet. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock Robert's father had built. I could hear the gentle hum of the old refrigerator. I turned to face her, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked at her expensive sweater, her professionally highlighted hair, her 2-carat diamond ring that sparkled under the warm kitchen light. I saw the condescension in her eyes, the complete and utter lack of awareness. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, hard clarity. The kind of clarity that comes after a long fever has broken. For years, I had been telling myself that this was just her way, that she didn't mean it, that she would grow out of it. I had made excuses for her, just as her mother always did. But standing there, in the heart of the home she so casually dismissed, a home that had been built on a foundation of love and sacrifice, I realized the truth. She did mean it, and she would never, ever understand, not unless I made her. Jessica, I said, and my voice was unnervingly calm. Why don't you and Tom host the next family dinner, at your house? I think it's time I saw this incredible new life you've built for yourselves. A look of surprise, then triumphant pleasure spread across her face. Really? Oh, Aunt Alina, we'd love that. It will be so much better. More space, proper seating for everyone. I'll make my famous risotto. I'm sure you will, I said, turning back to the chicken. The smile on my face felt alien, a mask I had put on for a battle I had only just decided to fight. I'm looking forward to it. As she walked away, humming a little tune, I stared out the window at the garden Robert and I had planted from seedlings. The leaves on the old maple tree were turning brilliant shades of orange and red. A beautiful, natural, and inevitable change. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that a change was coming to our family, too. A storm was brewing, and it was going to start in the kitchen of my sad old house. After everyone had left that Sunday, their bellies full of my chicken and their heads full of Jessica's plans for the proper family dinner she would host, I was left with the silence and the mess. The silence was a welcome friend, the mess was a familiar chore. I washed the dishes by hand in my deep porcelain sink, the warm, soapy water a comfort to my hands. As I scrubbed and rinsed, my mind was not on the leftovers or the wine stains on the tablecloth. It was replaying that single, dismissive word. Sad. My life was not sad. It was quiet, yes. It was simple. But it was rich in ways a balance sheet could never measure. After Robert passed away 5 years ago, the house had become my sanctuary, not my prison. It was a living testament to our 45 years together. The worn armchair in the corner of the living room still held the faint imprint of his body. The scent of his Old Spice aftershave sometimes lingered in the upstairs closet, a phantom kiss from the past. The bookshelves he built with his own hands lined the walls, filled with the books we had read aloud to each other on long winter nights. Sad? No. This house was the repository of my greatest joys. But Jessica's words had unlocked a door to a room in my mind I had kept deliberately shut for years. It was the room where I stored the ledgers, both financial and emotional. As I dried the last of the good silver, the forks and spoons we only used for family gatherings, I walked into the small room off the kitchen that Robert had used as his office. I hadn't changed a thing since he died. His heavy oak desk still faced the window, and his favorite green leather chair sat waiting for him. I sat down in that chair, its familiar creak a comforting sound, and pulled open the bottom right-hand drawer. It slid open smoothly, a testament to Robert's craftsmanship. Inside, beneath a stack of old tax returns, was a thick, navy blue ledger. I lifted it out and placed it on the desk. The cover was embossed in gold letters, the Family Education and Prosperity Fund. It felt heavy in my hands, heavy with the weight of decades of decisions, of sacrifices, of hope. Robert and I had started the fund when our son, Michael, was born. We weren't wealthy people. I was a second-grade teacher and Robert was a master carpenter. But we were careful. We lived simply, we saved diligently, and we invested wisely. We drove our cars until they fell apart, we patched our own clothes, and our idea of a vacation was a week of camping in the state park. We did it all with a shared goal in mind. "Eleanor," Robert had said to me one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, sketching out our plans on a napkin, "I don't want our kids or their kids to have to struggle the way we did. I want them to have a leg up. A good education, a down payment on a first home, a foundation, that's what we can give them." So we built that foundation, dollar by dollar. We seeded the fund with a small inheritance Robert had received, but the vast majority of it came from our own earnings. A portion of every paycheck I received and a percentage of every job Robert completed went into that account. When my parents passed away and left me this house outright, it freed up even more of our income. Instead of selling it and upgrading as Jessica would have done, we stayed. We loved this house, and living mortgage-free allowed us to pour even more into the fund. We saw it as an investment in our family's future. I was the sole trustee. It had been Robert's insistence. "You have the clearer head for numbers, my love," he'd always said, "and the softer heart for people." After Robert's passing, I continued our tradition. And after Michael moved away and made it clear he was financially secure and independent, the fund's focus had naturally shifted to my sister, Margaret, and her daughter, Jessica. Margaret had always struggled financially, a single mother working a series of low-paying jobs. The fund had been her lifeline. It paid for Jessica's braces, her summer camps, her first car, her entire college education at the state university. Margaret and Jessica knew about the trust, of course. They thought of it as some dusty, ancient inheritance from our grandparents, managed by a faceless bank downtown. They had no idea that I was the one signing the checks. They had no idea that the money wasn't just some endlessly regenerating family heirloom. It was supplemented by my teacher's pension and the careful investments Robert and I had made. They had no idea that my sad little house was the silent engine that powered their increasingly comfortable lives. I opened the ledger. The pages were filled with my neat, teacher's cursive, column after column of dates, descriptions, and amounts. I turned to the more recent pages, the ones that covered the last 3 years. My breath caught in my chest. I had been making the payments, of course, approving the transfers. But seeing them all laid out in one place was staggering. There was the wire transfer for $50,000. Labeled, "Down Payment Assistance, Jessica and Tom Miller, Maple Creek Estates, Lot 72." Then the monthly disbursements began. For the first year, they were smaller, more manageable. A few thousand here and there, assistance with closing costs, new furniture budget, property tax supplement. But in the last year, the requests had become more frequent, the amounts larger. They were funneled through Margaret, who would call me with a story. Eliner, Jessica is just so stressed. The new house needs so much. Can the fund help with the landscaping? It's just a sea of mud right now. Tom's bonus wasn't as big as they expected. They're a little short on the mortgage this month. Jessica saw a beautiful dining room set that would be perfect for hosting family dinners. It's on sale, but they need the money by Friday. And I, with my soft heart, had always said yes. I had approved the transfers, telling myself that this was what the fund was for, to provide a foundation. But as I scanned the entries, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. $15,000 for landscaping Phase 1. $8,000 for custom window treatments. $5,000 for home entertainment system upgrade. $2,500 a month, every month, for the last 6 months, labeled simply Living Expense Supplement. I pulled out a calculator from the desk drawer and began to add up the total for just the past 2 years since Jessica and Tom had bought their house. My hand shook as I tallied the final number. I checked it twice, convinced I had made a mistake, but the numbers were correct. $137,000 in 2 years. I leaned back in Robert's chair, the leather cool against my skin. The room felt like it was tilting. $137,000 had flowed from this fund, from my stewardship, from the life savings Robert and I had painstakingly built, to finance a lifestyle for a niece who looked upon my life and my home with pity and disgust. The foundation we had wanted to provide wasn't being used to build a life. It was being used to decorate one. It wasn't a leg up. It was a permanent crutch, wrapped in cashmere and plated in gold. The worst part was the deception. Not just my secrecy, but theirs. The pretense that they were succeeding on their own, that Tom's job was so lucrative it could support their lavish tastes. They were living a lie, a beautiful Pottery Barn catalog lie, and I was paying for every glossy page of it. My sadness from the kitchen earlier had now curdled into something else. It was a cold, quiet anger, an anger at their entitlement, an anger at my sister's willful blindness, but mostly a deep, profound anger at myself for being so foolish, for confusing financial support with love, for allowing my desire to help to be twisted into a form of enablement that was creating a person I barely recognized. I closed the ledger. The satisfying thud of the heavy cover echoed in the quiet room. The decision I had made in the kitchen now felt more than just necessary. It felt righteous. Jessica wanted to host a dinner to show off her superior life. Fine, let her. But it was time for a full accounting. It was time for the Family Education and Prosperity Fund to finally provide a real education. And the first lesson was about to be a very painful one. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for Mr. Davison, the family lawyer who had helped Robert and I set up the trust all those years ago. He was semi-retired now, but he still handled a few long-term clients. "Eliner," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Arthur," I said, my own voice steady and clear. "I need to schedule a meeting. It's about the fund. I believe it's time to conduct a full and formal review of the trust's activities, and I need to understand my options as trustee, all of them." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Arthur Davison knew my voice. He had known me for 30 years. He could hear the steel that had replaced the softness. "Of course, Eliner," he said. "How does Tuesday morning at 10 sound?" "Tuesday at 10 is perfect," I said, looking at the photograph of me and Robert on the desk. "It's long overdue." The 2 days between my call to Arthur Davison and our scheduled meeting passed in a strange state of heightened awareness. Every object in my house seemed to speak to me, whispering stories of its origin, of the sacrifices made to acquire it. The sturdy oak dining table wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was 3 months of Robert working weekends on a side project, carefully sanding and staining the wood until it glowed. The faded Persian rug in the hallway was a celebratory purchase after we'd finally paid off our car, a luxury we debated for weeks before allowing ourselves the indulgence. My home was a museum of a life built on intention, on the careful weighing of want versus need. And every memory, every sacrifice, sharpened the point of my resolve. Tuesday morning was crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that makes the world seem sharp and full of possibility. I dressed with care, choosing a simple navy blue dress and a string of pearls Robert had given me on our 30th anniversary. I was not going into this meeting as a victim. I was going as Alina Parsons, a retired teacher, a widow, and the trustee of a legacy I was determined to protect. Arthur Davison's office was in one of the older brick buildings downtown, the kind with a real brass letterbox and a heavy wooden door that closed with a satisfying click. The air inside smelled of old paper, leather, and brewing coffee. It was a comforting, solid smell, a world away from the fleeting, synthetic vanilla scents of the boutiques Jessica favored. Arthur greeted me himself, his handshake firm, his eyes, magnified by thick glasses, full of a gentle concern that was blessedly free of pity. "Alina, it's good to see you, though I suspect the circumstances could be better," he said, leading me into his spacious, book-lined office. He gestured to a comfortable leather chair opposite his own massive desk, which was a landscape of neat piles of paper and weighty-looking legal books. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Arthur," I said, settling into the chair. "Nonsense. For you and Robert, my door is always open." He sat down and leaned forward, his hands clasped on the blotter. "Now, you said on the phone this was about the fund. You sounded decisive." I took a deep breath. Decisive is the right word, I think. For a long time, I have been merely reactive. Now, I need to be proactive. I opened my purse and took out the navy blue ledger, placing it on his desk between us. "It starts with this." For the next hour, I laid out the entire story. I started with the fund's inception, with Robert's and my shared dream of providing a stable foundation for our family. I spoke of our quiet, frugal life, of the joy we took in seeing the account grow, knowing it was a tangible expression of our love. Then, I moved on to the last few years. I explained the arrangement, how Margaret and Jessica believed the fund was a distant, impersonal trust. I didn't spare myself, explaining how I had allowed my affection for my niece, and perhaps a misguided sense of duty, to cloud my judgment. I opened the ledger and showed him the recent pages. I pointed to the entries: the down payment, the landscaping, the living expense supplement. I told him about Jessica's constant, casual disdain for my home, my life. And I told him about Sunday, about the final, cutting remark that had severed the last thread of my patience. "She called my life sad, Arthur," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "She stood in the kitchen that this fund paid for her to get an education in, eating the food that my simple, pension-funded life provided, and she called it sad because my stove doesn't connect to the internet." Arthur listened without interruption. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his gaze fixed on the ledger as I spoke. He turned the pages slowly, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in a frown. When I finally finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingertips steepled under his chin. $137,000, he said, his voice a low rumble. "In 2 years, on top of the university tuition and everything that came before." "Yes," I said, "that's the number that woke me up." "Alina," he said, leaning back in his chair, which groaned in protest. "Let me be perfectly clear about the legalities here, just to fortify the ground you're standing on. The trust document, which Robert and I drafted together, is ironclad. You are the sole trustee. Your discretion is absolute. The fund's stated purpose is to provide for the health, education, and general welfare of the beneficiaries. It is not, however, intended to provide for their lavish and unsustainable lifestyle choices." He said the last words with a wry twist of his lips. "So I have the authority to simply stop?" I asked. "You have the authority to turn off the spigot, lock the pump, and sell the well for scrap if you so choose," he said. "There is no legal recourse they could possibly take. The trust is discretionary, not mandatory. You are the gatekeeper. And from what you've told me, and what these numbers show, You have every justification to believe that the fund's resources are being misused in a manner contrary to its original intent. A wave of relief washed over me. I thought so, but I needed to hear it from you. But, he continued, holding up a finger, before we discuss turning off the spigot, let's talk about the plumbing. You have several options, ranging from the gentle to the nuclear. He spent the next half hour outlining them. I could simply cut off all funds without explanation, a cold and clean break. I could send a formal letter, drafted by him, informing them that the fund was being reevaluated and that all disbursements were suspended indefinitely. Or I could confront them directly. The truth, you mean, I said. Yes, the truth, that you are the one in control. That the money they see as an entitlement is actually a gift that comes from the very life you lead, the life they seem to hold in such low esteem. They're coming for dinner on Saturday, I said. At their house. Jessica is planning to show me how a proper home is run. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. Well, isn't that a theatrical opportunity? That's what I thought, I said, a small, grim smile touching my lips for the first time that day. I don't want to be cruel, Arthur, but I believe a lesson is in order. A lesson in gratitude, in respect, and in basic economics. I want to do this face to face. I want to see her eyes when she understands. A perfectly reasonable, if dramatic, approach, he said, nodding slowly. In that case, we should prepare. I can draft a formal statement for you, a summary of the fund's activity, and a declaration of your intent as trustee. Something you can have in your pocket, a script to stick to if emotions run high. That would be very helpful, I said. And a leaner, he added, his voice softening. Be prepared for the fallout. This won't be a quiet conversation. It will be an explosion. There will be anger, denial, accusations. They will try to guilt you. They will try to manipulate you. Your sister Margaret will be caught in the middle. Are you ready for that? I thought of Robert. I thought of his calloused hands, his honest labor, his simple dream of giving his family a foundation, not a throne. I'm not just ready, Arthur, I said, my voice filled with a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I'm overdue. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in years, the ledger tucked securely back in my purse. It no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a weapon for truth. The very next afternoon the phone rang. It was Margaret, my sister. Her voice was bubbly, almost effervescent in a way that always set my teeth on edge. It was the voice she used when she was about to ask for something. Ellie, how are you, dear? She chirped. I'm well, Margaret, and you? I replied, keeping my tone even. Oh, just wonderful. I'm so excited about this dinner on Saturday. Jessica is pulling out all the stops. It's going to be such a treat for you to get out of that stuffy old house and see how the other half lives. She laughed, a tinkling sound that held no malice, only a profound, almost breathtaking ignorance. I'm looking forward to it, I said. Listen, dear, the reason I'm calling, she began, and I braced myself. Jessica was just saying that they're a tiny bit short on their entertaining budget for the month. Tom's commission check was delayed, you know how it is. She wants to get a new set of wine glasses to go with her new china, but they're a little pricey. I was just wondering, could the family trust help out? Just a little bit. It would mean so much to her to have everything be perfect for you. I closed my eyes. The audacity of it was almost beautiful in its purity. They wanted me to finance the very tools of my own humiliation. They wanted me to pay for the wine glasses from which they would drink a toast to their own success, a success built entirely on a lie I was bankrolling. This was the moment to draw the first line in the sand. Margaret, I said, and my voice was cool and measured. I don't think that will be possible. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I had never, in all the years, said no. Oh, she finally managed. Is there a problem with the fund? You could say that, I replied. I think all disbursements need to be put on hold for the time being, pending a full review. A review? What on earth for? She asked, a note of panic creeping into her voice. Jessica needs those glasses, Alina. Her old ones are from their wedding registry. They're practically ancient. Ancient? Their 3-year-old wine glasses were ancient. I thought of the glasses in my own cupboard, the ones my mother had passed down to me, their delicate, hand-etched surfaces still perfect after 50 years. "I'm sorry, Margaret, the decision is final. No more funds will be released before a full review is completed," I said, echoing the language Arthur and I had discussed. It felt good. It felt official. "Well, I don't understand," she huffed, her voice losing its bubbly charm and taking on a petulant edge. "It's just a few $100s. I don't see what the big deal is. I'll have to tell Jessica." "She's going to be terribly disappointed." "I'm sure she will be," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "But I'm sure she'll manage. We'll all just have to make do. I'll see you on Saturday." I hung up the phone before she could reply. I stood in my quiet kitchen, my hand still on the receiver. The first shot had been fired. It was a small one, a warning shot across the bow. But I knew from the panic in Margaret's voice that it had hit its mark. The countdown to Saturday had begun, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a genuine, unburdened sense of excitement. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to be in session. The days leading up to the dinner party were a master class in passive aggression, channeled primarily through my sister. Margaret called twice a day, her voice oscillating between wheedling and wounded. First, it was about the wine glasses. Jessica, apparently, was devastated and felt that the entire dinner was ruined before it had even begun. I simply replied that I was sure the ancient glasses would hold wine just as effectively as new ones. Next, it was about the centerpiece for the dining table. Jessica had her heart set on an elaborate floral arrangement from the most expensive florist in town, but without the supplement from the trust, it was an unjustifiable expense. Margaret hinted broadly that perhaps I could just pay for it myself as a hostess gift. I politely declined, suggesting that flowers from Jessica's own garden would be far more personal and charming. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a frosty. "Jessica doesn't have a garden, Alina. She has a landscape installation." The final, most desperate plea came on Friday evening. Margaret's voice was low and conspiratorial. "Ellie, I don't know what's going on with that bank, but this is serious. Tom and Jessica's property tax bill is due next week, and they were counting on the fund to cover it. They're in a real panic. You have to do something." "Margaret," I said, my voice calm and steady, a rock against her tide of manufactured crisis. "Jessica and Tom are adults with a household income. Paying their own property taxes is a fundamental part of home ownership." "But they're not used to it," she cried, as if this were a legitimate defense. "They have a certain lifestyle to maintain. You know how important appearances are in their neighborhood." "I am beginning to understand that more than you know," I replied cryptically. "I will see you all tomorrow night. Please, try not to worry. I have a feeling that many things are going to become much clearer for everyone very soon." I hung up, leaving her in a state of sputtering confusion. The final chess piece was in place. The crisis was not just about wine glasses anymore, it was real. The foundation they had taken for granted was showing cracks, and they were beginning to feel the tremor. On Saturday evening, I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple, elegant emerald green dress, one I'd owned for years, but that was beautifully made and fit me perfectly. It was the color of money, I thought with a private, internal smile. I put on the pearl necklace and the matching earrings from Robert. I felt armed, not in a hostile way, but in the way of a woman who knows her own worth and is about to defend her territory. As I drove across town, I watched the neighborhoods change. The modest, well-kept bungalows and split levels of my area gave way to sprawling tracts of identical, oversized houses, each with a 3-car garage and a meticulously manicured, chemically green lawn. Maple Creek Estates. Even the name sounded artificial, as if it had been chosen by a marketing committee. Jessica and Tom's house was at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was enormous, a beige monolith with a turret-like feature on the front that served no discernible purpose. It was less a home than a statement of financial accomplishment, or, as I now knew, a statement of financial dependency. Tom greeted me at the door. He was a tall, handsome young man with a politician's smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Aunt Alina, welcome, come on in, let me take your coat." "Thank you, Tom," I said, stepping inside. The house was impressive. In the way a hotel lobby is impressive. The ceilings were 2 stories high. The floors were a gleaming dark wood. The furniture was all shades of gray and beige, arranged in stark, geometric configurations that looked beautiful but deeply uncomfortable. There was not a single photograph, not a handmade object, not a touch of personal history to be seen. It was a house that had been decorated, not lived in. Jessica swept in from the kitchen, a vision in white linen trousers and a silk blouse. She kissed the air near my cheek. "Aunt Alina, I'm so glad you could make it. Can Tom get you a drink? We have a lovely Sauvignon Blanc." "That would be wonderful, thank you," I said, my eyes taking in the room. "Isn't it amazing?" she said, following my gaze, mistaking my assessment for admiration. "We just had the walls repainted in grayish. It's a specific shade that's supposed to promote a sense of calm and well-being." "It's very neutral," I observed. Margaret was already there, perched nervously on the edge of a severe-looking sofa, clutching a glass of wine. She gave me a tight, worried smile. For the first half hour, I allowed them to play out their performance. I was given the grand tour. I saw the chef's kitchen with its 6-burner gas range and its 2 dishwashers, an absolute necessity for entertaining, Jessica had explained. I saw the master bedroom with its ensuite bathroom the size of my living room and the walk-in closet that was more like a small boutique. I saw the media room in the basement with a television that took up an entire wall. With every room, their commentary was a litany of brand names and price tags. "This is Italian marble." That light fixture was imported from Denmark. The whole house is wired for sound, of course. They weren't sharing their home with me, they were presenting an inventory. Finally, we sat down to dinner in the formal dining room. The table was vast and polished to a mirror sheen. The china was new, but the wine glasses, I was pleased to note, were indeed the ancient ones from their wedding. A small, silent victory. Jessica served her risotto, which was, I had to admit, quite good. The conversation was stilted, revolving around Tom's golf game, the new country club they were thinking of joining, and their upcoming vacation to Tuscany. "We just have to figure out the cash flow for it first," Jessica said, shooting a pointed look first at her mother, then at me. I ate my risotto and listened. I let the silence stretch after her remark. I wanted them to be the ones to bring it up. I didn't have to wait long. It was Margaret who finally cracked. She put her fork down with a little clink. "Alina," she began, her voice strained. "We need to talk about this situation with the fund. Jessica is terribly worried. I am too. You can't just cut them off like that. It's not fair." Jessica chimed in, her voice taking on a righteous, wounded tone. "Mom is right, Aunt Alina. We've always been able to rely on the family trust. It's what Grandpa and Grandma would have wanted, for the family to be supported. We've built our entire financial plan around it." "Your financial plan?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. I set my own fork down and dabbed my lips with my napkin. I looked from Jessica's indignant face to Tom's carefully neutral one to Margaret's anxious expression. "I see. And who, exactly, did you consult when you created this financial plan?" "Well, our financial advisor, of course," Tom said, speaking for the first time. "He agreed that counting on the trust disbursements was a sound strategy." "Did he?" I said. "And did you provide this financial advisor with a copy of the trust document?" "Well, no," Tom admitted. "We just told him about the income stream." "I see," I said again. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, then I placed my hands on the table. "The show is over." 3 pairs of eyes stared at me in confusion. "What show?" Jessica asked. "This show," I said, gesturing around the vast, impersonal room. "The performance of wealth, the pretense of success, the illusion that you have achieved all of this through your own hard work and Tom's brilliant career." I paused, letting the words sink in. "We need to have a conversation about where this money actually comes from. We need to talk about the Family Education and Prosperity Fund." I reached into my purse and pulled out a slim file folder. Inside was the statement Arthur had prepared for me. I also pulled out the navy blue ledger. I placed them both on the polished table. I had a meeting with the family lawyer this week, I began. To conduct that review I mentioned, I am the trustee of the fund, you see. Margaret gasped, "You, but I always thought it was the bank." "No," I said, my gaze fixed on Jessica. "It's me. It has always been me. When you needed money for your braces, you wrote a thank you note to a trust account. You should have written it to me. Your college tuition was not paid by some anonymous benefactor. It was paid for by my teacher's salary and the money my husband, Robert, made building houses for other people. It was paid for by the life we chose to live, in the small, old house you find so sad." Jessica's face had gone pale. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 bright spots of angry red. That's not true," she stammered. "Oh, it's very true," I said, pushing the ledger across the table towards her. "This is the full accounting. Every dollar, every date, it's all there. The summer camps, the first car, the 4 years of university, and of course the last 2 years. Let's look at those together, shall we?" My voice was steady, my hand was not shaking. I was a teacher again, in my element, presenting a lesson that was long overdue. "There's the $50,000 down payment for this house, a house from which you look down on my own. There's $15,000 for the landscape installation, $8,000 for curtains, and my personal favorite, $2,500 a month for the last 6 months for living expenses. Do you know where that $2,500 comes from, Jessica?" She stared at the ledger, her mouth slightly agape, unable to speak. "It comes from my pension," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that filled the cavernous room. "It comes from the Social Security Robert worked for his entire life. It comes from the fact that I don't buy new wine glasses or get my walls painted grayish or have a chef's kitchen. It comes from the equity in my sad little house. The house you mock. My simple life, the one you pity, is the silent, unacknowledged engine that has been fueling your grand one." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator from the kitchen. Tom was staring at the ledger as if it were a venomous snake. Margaret looked like she was about to faint, but Jessica's shock was rapidly being replaced by a cold, hard fury. Her blue eyes, so like her mother's, flashed with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How dare you hold that over our heads? It was family money. It was meant for us. It was meant to be a foundation, not a free ride," I countered, my own voice rising to meet hers. "It was meant to help, not to create a pair of spoiled, entitled adults who have no concept of the value of a dollar because they've never truly had to earn one. You don't have a financial plan. You have a rich aunt, and you didn't even have the decency to be kind to her. This is entrapment." She suddenly shrieked, pushing her chair back so violently it screeched against the floor. "You let us build this life, you let us get used to it, and now you're pulling the rug out from under us just to be cruel." "No, Jessica," I said, standing up to face her. "I am not being cruel. I am being a responsible trustee, a role I have neglected for far too long out of a misplaced sense of affection. The Bank of Aunt Alina is now closed. The fund's purpose was health, education, and general welfare. Your education is paid for. You appear to be in good health. From now on, your general welfare is your own responsibility." I picked up my purse and the file folder, leaving the ledger sitting in the middle of the table, an indictment in navy blue. "Thank you for the risotto. It was lovely." I turned and walked out of the dining room. Margaret was sobbing quietly into her napkin. Tom was still frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and horror as the reality of their financial situation began to dawn on him. As I walked towards the front door, Jessica's voice, shrill with rage and panic, followed me down the long, echoing hall. "You can't do this. You'll ruin us. We'll lose the house. You owe us this." I paused at the door, my hand on the cool brass handle. I turned back to look at her, standing there in her palace of beige, her beautiful, empty life crumbling around her. "No, Jessica," I said, my voice soft now, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "I don't owe you a thing, but you owe me $137,000 worth of respect, and it seems you're bankrupt." I opened the door and walked out into the cool night air, leaving them to the silence and the truth. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the sound of the tires on the pavement, a steady, rhythmic sound that felt like progress. A profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the giddy feeling of victory, but the quiet, solid satisfaction of a difficult job well done. I had finally balanced the ledger. As I pulled into my own driveway, the warm lights of my little house glowed in the darkness. The porch light illuminated the peeling paint on the railing and the crack in the front steps that I needed to ask the handyman to fix. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't new, but it was mine. Every last, paid-for, memory-filled inch of it. I walked inside and was greeted by the familiar, comforting scent of old books and lemon polish. I went into the living room and sat down in Robert's armchair. It sighed as it took my weight, a familiar, friendly sound. I looked around the room, at the floral sofa and the buttercup yellow walls and the scuff marks on the floor. It wasn't sad. It was the furthest thing from sad. It was the house that love built. And tonight, it was the house that truth had finally defended. I slept more soundly that night than I had in 5 years. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of a soldier after a long-won battle, the rest that comes when a heavy, invisible burden has finally been set down. I awoke not to an alarm, but to the gentle morning sun slanting across my bedroom floor. For a moment, I lay there, simply breathing, feeling the comfortable weight of my grandmother's quilt, listening to the cheerful chatter of sparrows in the maple tree outside my window. The house was quiet. My heart was quiet. The peace I had felt the night before had not been a fleeting emotion. It had settled into my very bones. I went about my morning routine with a sense of deliberate pleasure. I brewed a pot of rich, dark coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen. I toasted a thick slice of sourdough bread and spread it with the blackberry jam I had made in late summer. I sat at my small kitchen table, the one that Jessica had once called rickety, and savored every bite. I wasn't just eating breakfast. I was performing a sacrament of self-care, a ritual of reclaiming my own life. The phone rang at precisely 9 o'clock. I knew, with absolute certainty, who it would be. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of coffee before I answered. It was a small act of control, a reminder to myself that I was no longer at anyone's beck and call. "Hello," I said, my voice even and calm. "Eleanor." "Thank God you answered." It was Margaret, and she sounded as though she hadn't slept at all. Her voice was a ragged whisper, frayed with panic and exhaustion. "I've been calling for an hour." "I was having my breakfast, Margaret," I said simply. "Breakfast? How can you think about breakfast at a time like this? The world is ending." She wailed. "Jessica called me at midnight hysterical. Tom had to give her a sedative. A sedative, Eleanor. Do you understand what you've done?" I took another sip of coffee. "What I have done," I said, spacing my words carefully, "is tell the truth. It seems to have been a rather shocking revelation." "It's a catastrophe," she insisted. "They can't pay their bills, they're going to lose the house. That beautiful house, Eleanor. Tom is running the numbers, and he says they're completely ruined without the fund. Their mortgage payment is more than his take-home pay." "Then perhaps they bought a house they could not afford," I observed, as if discussing a character in a book. "That is often the consequence of living beyond one's means." "But their means included the fund. It always has." She cried, her voice cracking. "You can't just change the rules overnight. This is cruel. It's vindictive. Jessica is your only niece. She's my daughter. How can you be so heartless?" The word heartless stung, but only for a moment. The old Eleanor would have crumpled under that accusation, her guilt overwhelming her resolve. But the old Eleanor was gone. "Was it not heartless, Margaret, for Jessica to mock my home, a home that sheltered her own mother when you had nowhere else to go after your divorce? Was it not heartless for her to treat me like a walking bank account while showing me not an ounce of genuine affection or respect? The heart has been on one side of this equation for a very long time, and it has not been hers." "She's just a child," Margaret sobbed. "Jessica is 31 years old, I corrected her gently. She is a married woman and a homeowner. It is long past time she stopped behaving like a spoiled child, and it is long past time that you stopped enabling her. That silenced her. I could hear her ragged breathing on the other end of the line. I knew I had struck a nerve, a truth she had probably spent 3 decades avoiding. So what are we supposed to do? She finally whispered. That is no longer a wee question, Margaret, I said, my voice softening slightly. I still loved my sister, and I pitied the impossible position she was in. Jessica and Tom need to sit down, look at their real income, and create a real budget. They will have to make difficult choices. They may have to sell the house. Jessica may have to get a job. This is what normal people do when their income changes. It is called adapting to reality. She'll never forgive you for this, she said, her voice hollow. Perhaps, I conceded, but my goal was not to win her forgiveness. It was to reclaim my own self-respect and to protect her grandfather's legacy from being squandered on imported light fixtures and grayish paint. I took a deep breath, preparing to set the final, non-negotiable boundary. Margaret, I love you, but I will not discuss the fund with you again. It is a legal matter between myself, as trustee, and the beneficiaries. From this point forward, any and all inquiries about the trust must be directed to my lawyer, Arthur Davison. Here is his number. I suggest you write it down. I gave her the number, and then, before she could launch into another round of pleading, I said, I have to go now. I have a busy day. Goodbye, Margaret. I hung up the phone and stood in the sunlit kitchen, my heart beating steadily. It was done. The first wave of the counterattack had been repelled. I felt a pang of sadness for my sister, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of rightness. I had not just been speaking to Margaret. I had been speaking to the part of myself that for years had allowed guilt to be used as a currency. I looked around my kitchen, at the peeling paint on the windowsill that Jessica had so often pointed out. I walked over to the junk drawer, pulled out the business card for a local handyman Robert had always trusted, and I called him. Mr. Henderson, I said, it's Alina Parsons. I have a few projects I've been putting off for far too long. I was wondering when you might have some time to stop by and give me an estimate. An hour later, I was in my garden pulling weeds from the rose bushes when a sleek, black BMW I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway with a spray of gravel. Jessica and Tom got out. Jessica's eyes were hidden behind a pair of enormous sunglasses, but her face was pale and set in a mask of grim fury. Tom, looking exhausted and rumpled in his expensive suit, hurried around to her side. They marched up my walkway as if they were storming a castle. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands onto my gardening apron, and met them at the bottom of the porch steps. I did not invite them up. I did not invite them in. I stood my ground, my home at my back. Aunt Alina, Tom began, trying to inject a tone of pained reason into his voice. We need to talk about this. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. There has been no misunderstanding, Tom, I replied, my voice cool. For the first time, there is perfect understanding. Jessica ripped off her sunglasses, and her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but they blazed with defiance, not remorse. You can't be serious, she hissed. You are going to destroy our lives over a few thoughtless comments. This is not about a few comments, Jessica. This is about a pattern of behavior that spans years, I said. It is about a profound lack of gratitude and a staggering sense of entitlement. The comments were merely the final symptom of a much deeper disease. We'll pay you back, she blurted out, the words sounding foreign and clumsy on her tongue. We'll work out a payment plan. Just turn the money back on. We need to pay the taxes. We need to live. A payment plan? I asked, raising an eyebrow. That is an interesting concept, but the fund is not a bank, Jessica. It is a gift, and the gifts have now stopped. As for your living expenses, I believe Tom has a job, and the last I checked, the world is full of them. Perhaps it's time you found one yourself. The shot hit home. Jessica flinched as if I had slapped her. I am a household manager. No, I said, my patience finally wearing thin. You are unemployed, and you are living in a house you cannot afford. Those are the facts. What you do with them is now up to you and your husband. Tom stepped forward, trying to play the peacemaker. Alina, please, let's be reasonable. We are prepared to apologize. We are prepared to make amends. We just need some breathing room, a little help to get back on our feet. If you could just authorize the tax payment, it would give us time to figure things out. His tone was calm, but his plea was the same. Give us money. I looked at this handsome young man who had been so happy to live off the pension of his wife's elderly aunt without a single question or qualm. I saw no real contrition in his eyes, only the panicked calculations of a man staring into a financial abyss. I have already explained the situation to your mother-in-law, Tom, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. The trust is no longer dispersing funds. All future communications on this matter must go through my lawyer. Mr. Henderson, my handyman, will be here any minute, and I need to show him the work I want done. I suggest you leave. You're really going to do it, Jessica whispered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and venom. You're going to sit here in this crumbling museum and watch us lose everything. I looked her straight in the eye. No, Jessica, I said. I am going to sit here in my home, the home your grandfather and I built with our own hands, and I am going to finally start spending his legacy on my own happiness. What you do is your business. This is mine. I turned without another word, walked up the steps, and went into my house, closing the heavy oak door behind me. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a quiet, decisive click. I leaned against the door for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs. That was harder than the phone call. Seeing her face, seeing the raw, uncomprehending rage. It hurt. It hurt in a deep, familial way. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. A part of me had wanted to cave, to write the check for the taxes just to make the confrontation end. But I knew if I gave them an inch, they would take 100 miles. The lesson would be lost. And I owed it to Robert and to myself to see it through. I wonder, what would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. I truly read every single one. And if you're enjoying my story, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Mama Lottie Stories. It helps more than you know. Through the window, I watched them stand in my driveway for another minute, seemingly stunned. Then they got back in their expensive car and sped away. I watched them go, not with triumph, but with a profound and aching sadness for the family we had been, and the family we could never be again. But beneath the sadness, there was a foundation of resolve, solid and unshakable. I had closed the door, and it was going to stay closed until, and if, they ever learned how to knock with respect. I went to the kitchen and put on a kettle for tea. Mr. Henderson would be here soon. There was work to be done. My work. The sound of Mr. Henderson's sturdy work truck rumbling up the driveway was a welcome intrusion on the quiet aftermath of the confrontation. It was the sound of progress, of action. I watched through the kitchen window as he got out, a tall, wiry man in his late 60s with a kind, weathered face and hands that looked like they could build or fix anything. He had been a friend of Robert's, a fellow craftsman who understood the language of wood and stone. I met him on the porch, and his smile was genuine. "Morning, Alina. It's been too long. You said on the phone you had a list for me." "It's a list that's been gathering dust for too long, Frank," I admitted, leading him inside. The woman of the house has finally decided to stop procrastinating. We started with the practical things, the small points of decay that Jessica had so delighted in cataloging. The cracked porch step, the section of gutter that had pulled away from the roofline, the persistent drip in the upstairs bathroom faucet. With each item, Frank would nod, run a knowledgeable hand over the area, and make a note on his pad. "Easy fix," he'd say. "Solid wood here, just needs to be reset. That's just a new washer, no trouble at all." He saw not the flaws, but the potential. He saw the good bones of the house, a phrase he used often, and it was like a balm to my soul. "Robert built this place to last, Alina," he said as he examined the peeling paint on the window frames in the living room. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore. These new houses they're throwing up over in Maple Creek. They look impressive, but they're all particle board and vinyl. A good huff and puff might take one down. This place," he knocked on the solid wall with his knuckle, producing a satisfying thud, "this place has integrity." Integrity, The word resonated deep within me. That was the difference. My house, my life, had integrity. Jessica's was a facade. I don't just want to fix the peeling paint, Frank, I found myself saying, the idea blooming in my mind even as I spoke it. I want to change the color, the whole house, inside and out. Frank raised his eyebrows, a pleased smile playing on his lips. Oh yeah, getting tired of the buttercup yellow. I think I'm in the mood for something bolder, I said, a thrill of excitement running through me. Maybe a nice sage green for the living room. And the kitchen, I've been thinking about the kitchen. I led him into the heart of my home. Jessica, my niece, hates this kitchen. She says my stove is a relic. Frank ran a hand almost reverently over the cool enamel of the O'Keefe and Merritt. A relic? Eleanor, this is a classic. They don't make 'em like this anymore. But, he added, looking around with a professional eye, the countertops are a bit worn and you could use more light. Exactly, I said, my vision becoming clearer. I want new countertops. Not marble, I added with a private, bitter smile, but a good, sturdy butcher block, perhaps, and new lighting under the cabinets. Maybe we could even take out that small pantry wall and open it up to the dining room. What do you think? For the next hour, we weren't just planning repairs. We were redesigning my life. We talked about paint chips and hardware finishes, about the pros and cons of subway tile versus a patterned backsplash. Frank sketched ideas on his notepad, his pencil flying across the page. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based purely on my own taste, my own desires. I felt a creative energy I thought had long since been buried under years of caregiving and financial stewardship for others. The cost of it all, I realized, would likely be less than what I had given Jessica for her custom window treatments. The thought was both infuriating and fantastically liberating. It's a big project, Eleanor, Frank said as he tallied up a rough estimate at my kitchen table. But it would make a world of difference. Really bring this place to life. That's exactly what I want, Frank, I said, looking at the number on his pad. It was a significant sum, but it was my money, an investment in my own sanctuary. When can you start? After he left, I felt giddy with a sense of purpose. I had spent the morning planning the dismantling of walls, both literal and metaphorical. I had just put the kettle on for a celebratory cup of tea when the phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Cautiously, I answered. Mrs. Eleanor Parsons. A crisp, professional voice asked. This is she. My name is Andrew Sterling. I am an attorney with the firm Sterling, Finch, and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of my clients, Jessica and Thomas Miller. My blood ran cold. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. So soon. They had wasted no time. I see, I said, my voice commendably steady. And what is the nature of this call, Mr. Sterling? My clients have informed me of a sudden and arbitrary cessation of disbursements from a family trust of which they are beneficiaries, he said, his voice smooth and practiced. They are, of course, deeply concerned. They believe there may be grounds to contest the current administration of the trust, perhaps on the basis of trustee malfeasance or incapacity. Incapacity, the word was a slap in the face. It was the classic, nasty tactic Arthur had warned me about. They weren't just coming for the money anymore. They were coming for my credibility, my very sanity. I took a slow, deep breath, remembering my lawyer's advice. Stay calm, stick to the script. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice like ice. I am represented by counsel. My lawyer is Mr. Arthur Davison. I am sure you can find his number. Any and all future communication regarding the trust must be directed to his office. I will not be discussing this matter with you further. Mrs. Parsons, I would advise you to cooperate, he began, his tone shifting from smooth to menacing. Protracted litigation can be very stressful and expensive for a person of your years. Are you threatening me, Mr. Sterling? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. There was a slight pause. I am simply outlining the potential realities of the situation, ma'am. I am well aware of the realities, I said, and the reality is that this conversation is over. You have my lawyer's name. Goodbye. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. Incapacity. They would actually try to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, all because I had stopped paying for their landscaping. The sheer, naked greed of it was breathtaking. The battle was escalating far faster than I had imagined. This wasn't just about a family dispute anymore, it was becoming a legal war. I immediately called Arthur and told him about the call from Mr. Sterling. Sterling, Finch, and Associates, Arthur sighed. Of course, they're a notoriously aggressive firm. They specialize in this sort of thing. It's the legal equivalent of hiring thugs. He used the word incapacity, Arthur, I said, the word leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I'm not surprised, Aliner. It's the only arrow they have in their quiver, he reassured me. And it's a weak one. Don't you worry. I'll handle Mr. Sterling. He's all bark and no bite when he comes up against a well-prepared defense. Just continue to live your life. Don't answer any more calls from numbers you don't recognize, and document everything. Every call, every letter, every time they drive past your house. I hung up feeling rattled but not defeated. His confidence was contagious. I had the truth on my side, I had a good lawyer, and I had a kitchen to remodel. A few days later, I met my friend Beatrice for our weekly lunch. Beatrice was a retired history professor, a woman with a sharp mind and a tongue to match. She had been a widow for 10 years and had navigated her own share of family dramas with her 2 grown sons. She was the only person, besides Arthur, to whom I had confided the full extent of the situation. We sat in our favorite booth at a small downtown diner, the air thick with the smell of coffee and fried onions. I recounted the events of the past week, the disastrous dinner party, the frantic phone calls from Margaret, the visit from Jessica and Tom, and finally, the call from their new lawyer. Beatrice listened intently, her sharp blue eyes missing nothing. She slowly stirred her iced tea, a thoughtful frown on her face. When I finished, she set her spoon down with a decisive clink. Well, she said, the little vultures have hired a bigger vulture. Predictable. He used the word incapacity, I said, the word still stinging. Of course he did, she snorted. It's the scoundrel's last resort. When you can't win on the facts, you attack the person. They're trying to scare you, Aliner, to bully you into submission. They're hoping you'll be the stereotypical frightened little old lady who will sign anything to make the unpleasantness go away. Well, this little old lady is fresh out of fear, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. I think I've replaced it with a sudden passion for home renovation. I told her about my plans with Frank Henderson, about the new kitchen and the paint colors and the feeling of taking back control of my own space. Her face lit up. Bravo, she declared, reaching across the table to pat my hand. That is the absolute best response. You live, you build, you create. You show them that your life isn't ending, it's just beginning a new chapter. Let them waste their money and what little credibility they have on ambulance-chasing lawyers. You invest in yourself. Her pragmatic, unsentimental support was exactly what I needed. I'm just so sad for Margaret, I confessed. She's caught in the middle of it all. Aliner, Beatrice said, her voice firm but not unkind. Margaret chose her spot in the middle. She has been Jessica's chief enabler for 30 years. Your sister loves comfort, and Jessica's ability to extract money from the family trust made Margaret's life comfortable. She's not a neutral party. She's a co-conspirator who has just had her supply line cut. It was a harsh assessment, but a truthful one. I knew she was right. We finished our lunch, our conversation turning to books, politics, and Beatrice's plans for a trip to the Grand Canyon. It felt wonderful to have a normal conversation, to be Aliner Parsons, friend and individual, not just Aunt Aliner, the contested family trust. As I was driving home, feeling fortified and clear-headed, I passed the sprawling entrance to Maple Creek Estates. On a whim, I turned in. I told myself I was just curious. I drove slowly down the winding streets, past the identical, oversized houses and the perfectly manicured lawns. It was like a movie set, beautiful and sterile. There were no children playing in the yards, no neighbors chatting over fences. There was no life. I found their street, their cul-de-sac, and I saw it. Parked in front of their beige monolith of a house was a large, unmissable sign. It was red and white, hammered into the pristine lawn. It read in big, bold letters, "For sale BY owner." My heart gave a jolt. They were selling the house. The reality of their financial ruin was no longer an abstract concept. It was a sign hammered into their lawn for the whole world to see. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction. The lesson was being learned, the consequences were real. But a deeper part of me felt a profound wave of sorrow. The beautiful house, the dream they had chased so relentlessly, the very symbol of the life they had built on a foundation of lies, was already lost. The storm I had unleashed was moving faster and more destructively than I could ever have imagined. The quiet satisfaction I felt after lunch had evaporated, replaced by a churning mixture of pity and dread. The "for sale" sign was not just a sign, it was a declaration of war, and I had a terrible feeling that their desperation was about to make them very, very dangerous. My hand tightened on the steering wheel as I drove away. The legal threat was one thing. This public humiliation was another. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was far from over. That evening, the official opening salvo of the legal war arrived. It came via a courier, a young man who handed me a thick, crisp envelope that required my signature. The return address was that of Sterling, Finch, and Associates. My hands were perfectly steady as I signed for it. I closed the door and walked into my living room, the envelope feeling like a cold stone in my hand. I sat in Robert's armchair and used one of my mother's old silver letter openers to slit it open. The documents inside were dense with legal jargon, but the intent was clear. It was a formal petition to the court. They were seeking to have me removed as trustee of the Family Education and Prosperity Fund. And the stated reasons were a grotesque caricature of the truth. They accused me of erratic and punitive behavior, of being susceptible to outside influence, and of having demonstrated a clear cognitive decline that made me unfit to manage the trust's assets. They were formally, legally, trying to declare me mentally incompetent. Seeing it there, in black and white, on official-looking letterhead, was different from hearing it over the phone. It was real. It was happening. And I was going to have to fight. I read the petition twice, my teacher's mind instinctively cutting through the convoluted legal phrasing to the raw, ugly accusations at its core. Each sentence was a carefully crafted lie, designed to paint a picture of a confused, vindictive old woman. They cited my sudden decision to stop payments as evidence of my instability, completely ignoring the years of provocation. They twisted my desire for privacy, my refusal to engage with their lawyer, into proof of paranoia. They even had the audacity to suggest that my recent decision to hire a handyman for extensive and unnecessary renovations was a sign of reckless, spendthrift behavior, implying I was squandering the very assets I was meant to protect. The document was a masterpiece of malice, a portrait of me painted by my enemies. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, clear anger took its place. They thought they could define me, label me, and discard me. They had underestimated Alina Parsons. The next morning, I was on the phone with Arthur Davison before his office had officially opened. I read him key passages from the petition, my voice level and devoid of the hysteria they were so clearly trying to provoke. "It's a declaration of war, Arthur," I concluded. "It's a work of fiction, Alina," he countered, his voice a reassuring rumble of calm professionalism. "And a poorly written one at that. Don't let the legal language intimidate you. This is a standard, baseless attack. They have no medical evidence, no expert testimony. All they have are the self-serving statements of two financially desperate beneficiaries. It's a transparent money grab, and any competent judge will see it for what it is." "What's our next move?" I asked, feeling like a general planning a campaign. "Our next move is to build an unbreachable wall of evidence to the contrary," he said. "First, I'll file our official response denying all their claims. Then, we go on the offensive. I want you to see a specialist, a geriatric psychiatrist I work with, Dr. Lena Hansen. She's the best in the state. I want a full, comprehensive cognitive and psychiatric evaluation. It will be our cornerstone, an unimpeachable expert opinion that establishes your competence beyond any doubt. A psychiatric evaluation. The idea was unsettling, an admission that their absurd claims even needed to be professionally refuted. "I know it's an indignity, Alina," Arthur said, his voice softening with empathy. "But in a situation like this, we have to fight fire with fire. Their strategy is to create doubt. Our strategy is to present irrefutable facts. Dr. Hansen's report will be the fact that blows their entire case out of the water." "All right," I agreed, my resolve hardening. "Whatever it takes." "Good, my office will schedule the appointment. In the meantime, I also want to get sworn affidavits from people who know you. Your friend Beatrice, Frank Henderson, maybe even your pastor. We'll build a chorus of voices that testify to your character, your clarity, and your sound mind. We will bury them in the truth, Alina." Hanging up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had thrown down the gauntlet, and I was picking it up. My day was no longer about paint chips and butcher blocks. It was about defending my very identity. The appointment with Dr. Hansen was scheduled for the following week. In the interim, Frank Henderson and his small crew began their work. The sounds of careful, productive demolition filled my house. The old, worn countertops were hauled away. The small pantry wall came down, and for the first time, a clear line of sight opened up between my kitchen and dining room. The space was instantly brighter, larger, more welcoming. Every hammer blow, every saw's whine, felt like a blow against the stagnation and neglect of the past. I was tearing down the old and building something new, both in my home and in my life. I also sat down with Beatrice, who was more than happy to provide a sworn statement. "Declare you incompetent." She'd snorted over a cup of tea. "Darling, you're more competent than most of the United States Congress. I'll be delighted to tell a judge that." The day of my appointment with Dr. Hansen arrived. I was nervous, not because I doubted my own mind, but because the process felt inherently adversarial. I was being forced to prove my sanity. Dr. Hansen was nothing like I expected. She wasn't a cold, clinical interrogator. She was a warm, engaging woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle sense of humor. Her office was comfortable, more like a cozy library than a doctor's office. "Alina," she began, after we had settled into 2 comfortable armchairs. "I've read the petition filed against you, and I've read the preliminary notes from your lawyer. What I'd like to do today is simply talk, and then we'll do some more formal cognitive assessments. This is a space for you to tell your story, in your own words." And so I did. For over an hour, I told her everything. I told her about Robert, about our dreams for the fund, about my relationship with Margaret and Jessica. I told her about the constant, subtle dismissals, the growing sense of being used, the final, painful confrontation. I didn't hold back my sadness or my anger. I laid my life out for her, the good, the bad, and the painful. She listened patiently, asking gentle, probing questions that helped me articulate feelings I hadn't even fully acknowledged myself. Then came the cognitive tests. She gave me memory exercises, logic puzzles, and complex financial scenarios to analyze. She asked me to explain the stock market, to calculate percentages, to read a balance sheet. It was rigorous, challenging, and, to my surprise, deeply empowering. As I worked through the problems, I could feel the strength of my own mind, a muscle I had honed over a lifetime of teaching, managing a household, and overseeing a complex trust. At the end of the 3-hour session, Dr. Hansen leaned back and smiled. "Well, Alina," she said, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine admiration. "I can say with complete medical certainty that you are one of the most cognitively sound and mentally resilient individuals I have had the pleasure of evaluating in a very long time. Your financial literacy is superb, your memory is excellent, and your reasoning skills are impeccable." She paused, her expression turning more serious. "What this petition describes is not cognitive decline. It describes a classic, and deeply unfortunate, case of elder financial abuse, followed by retaliatory legal action when the source of funds was cut off. My report will state as much in no uncertain terms." I felt a wave of validation so powerful it almost brought tears to my eyes. A medical expert had not only confirmed my sanity, she had named the crime that had been committed against me: elder financial abuse. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You have nothing to thank me for, Alina," she said. "You are simply a woman who has found the courage to stand up for herself. Don't ever let anyone make you doubt that." I left her office walking on air. The cornerstone of my defense was now firmly in place. Arthur was ecstatic when I called him with the news. "This is it, Alina." He'd boomed over the phone. "This is the silver bullet. I'll have her official report by the end of the week. I'm sending a copy to Mr. Sterling with a very strongly worded letter, suggesting that his clients withdraw their baseless petition before they embarrass themselves and their counsel any further in court." A week passed. The work on my house progressed beautifully. The new butcher block countertops were installed, warm and golden under the new undercabinet lighting. The walls of the living room were a lovely shade of sage green, which made the whole room feel peaceful and alive. My home was transforming, reflecting the changes that were happening within me. Then Arthur called again. His voice was grim. "Alina, I've heard back from Sterling." "And?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "They're refusing to withdraw the petition. They're demanding a court-ordered mediation session, and they're playing their last, ugliest card. They've filed a motion to have Jessica appointed as your temporary guardian, pending the outcome of the case." I sank into a chair. A temporary guardian, the idea was vile. My niece, the person who had driven me to this point, being given legal control over my life, my finances, my home. It was a hostile takeover attempt. Can they do that? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They can ask," Arthur said, his voice hard as nails. "But it's a desperate, nasty move, and I highly doubt a judge will grant it, especially in light of Dr. Hansen's report. But it means we have to go to mediation. The court requires it. We will sit in a room with them and a neutral third party and attempt to find a resolution." "A resolution?" I asked, incredulous. What resolution could there possibly be? They want my money and I'm not going to give it to them. It's that simple. "I know, Alina, but we have to go through the process, so we will go, we will sit there, we will listen to their demands, and we will say no. Politely, but firmly. Think of it as the final, formal nail in the coffin of this ridiculous lawsuit." The mediation was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at a neutral law office downtown. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floors of my newly painted living room, the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings filling the air. I was not afraid, but I was filled with a deep, visceral dread. I was about to face my family in a sterile conference room and have our broken relationship dissected by strangers. It felt like the final, ugly autopsy of a love that had long since died. I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. The old maple tree, now bare of its autumn leaves, stood like a stark, honest skeleton against the night sky. It was not sad. It was simply waiting for spring. And I knew, in that moment, that I was too. I just had to get through this one last winter storm. The next day, I dressed in the same emerald green dress I had worn to their house for that fateful dinner. I put on my pearls. I walked into that mediation room not as a victim, but as the matriarch of a family, a woman about to teach her final, most difficult lesson. Jessica, Tom, and my sister Margaret were already there, seated on one side of a long, polished table. They looked drawn and tired. The bravado was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful silence. They wouldn't meet my eyes. Mr. Sterling sat beside them, his face a mask of professional confidence. Arthur and I took our seats opposite them. The mediator, a calm, gray-haired woman named Mrs. Gable, introduced herself and explained the process. Then she turned to Mr. Sterling and said, "Perhaps you'd like to begin by outlining your client's position." Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and began to speak. He laid out their concerns about my well-being and my erratic financial decisions. He spoke of their desire to protect me and the family assets. It was the same litany of lies from the petition, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of them, in front of me, gave it a new, potent venom. I listened without expression. When he was finished, Mrs. Gable turned to us. "Mr. Davison." "Thank you," Arthur said, his voice calm and powerful. My client's position is quite simple. She is a mentally competent, financially astute woman who has been the victim of sustained financial exploitation by the very people now claiming to be her protectors. We have a comprehensive report from a leading geriatric psychiatrist confirming her exceptional cognitive state. We have financial records detailing the hundreds of thousands of dollars that have been gifted to Mr. and Mrs. Miller over the years. This petition is not born of concern. It is born of greed. It is a frivolous and malicious lawsuit, and it will be defeated in court. He then slid a copy of Dr. Hansen's full report across the table. I watched as Mr. Sterling picked it up. He began to read, his confident expression slowly faltering. I saw Jessica's eyes flicker over to the report, her face paling as she saw the bolded, official-looking headings. Now, Arthur continued, in the spirit of mediation, we are prepared to offer a resolution. A final, one-time settlement to end this matter here and now. Jessica's head snapped up. A flicker of hope, of avarice, ignited in her eyes. Arthur opened his briefcase and pulled out a single, crisp, navy blue ledger. My ledger. He opened it to the last page, where the grand total of their gifts was tallied. Here is our offer, Arthur said, his voice ringing with authority. My client, Mrs. Parsons, will agree to forgive the $137,000 she has so generously provided for this house, its furnishings, and your lifestyle over the past 2 years. She will consider that debt paid in full. In return, you will immediately withdraw this insulting petition, and you will sign a binding agreement to never again contest her administration of the trust or make any further financial claims upon her or her estate. This is a one-time offer. Take it, or we will see you in court, where we will not only have this petition dismissed, but we will also countersue for legal fees and damages related to this malicious prosecution. The room was silent. Jessica stared at Arthur, then at me, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. Forgiveness of the debt, it was a fortune, but it meant the money was truly gone, the free ride was over. Forever. I saw the war in her eyes, the entitlement fighting the dawning, terrifying reality. I saw her look at Tom, who looked utterly defeated. I saw her look at her mother, who was weeping silently. And then she looked at me. For the first time that day, she truly looked at me. Her eyes were no longer filled with rage, but with a stark, desolate emptiness, the look of a person who had gambled everything and lost. We accept, she whispered, the words barely audible. Mr. Sterling, looking utterly stunned by Arthur's aggressive tactic, simply nodded. The fight was over. I had won. But as I sat there, under the fluorescent lights of that sterile conference room, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. The signing of the settlement agreement was a quiet, joyless affair. Papers were pushed across the polished table, signatures were scrawled in blue ink, and the lifeblood of my family's broken relationship was reduced to a series of legal clauses. Jessica's hand trembled as she signed her name, her gaze fixed on the document as if she couldn't bear to look up. Tom signed quickly, mechanically, his face a grim mask. Margaret, her eyes puffy and red, had to be prompted by Mr. Sterling when it was her turn. She was a beneficiary, and her assent was required to finalize the agreement. Her signature was a shaky, almost illegible scrawl, the final act of a woman caught between a daughter she had enabled and a sister she had betrayed. When it was over, Arthur neatly stacked our copies of the documents and placed them in his briefcase. Our business here is concluded, he said, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Jessica, Tom, and Mr. Sterling rose to leave. Margaret remained seated, her head bowed. As they filed out of the room, Jessica paused at the doorway. She turned, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second I saw past the anger and the entitlement. I saw the little girl I had once known, her face streaked with tears after falling off her bicycle, looking at me with a mixture of pain and confusion. Was it worth it, Aunt Alina? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. Was it worth destroying the family over money? The question, so profoundly unjust, so completely backward, hung in the air. Before I could even formulate a response, Arthur Davison, my gentle, methodical lawyer, spoke up. He didn't raise his voice, but it cut through the room with the force of a judge's gavel. "Young lady," he said, looking at Jessica with a gaze that was both pitying and severe. "Your aunt did not destroy this family over money. You tried to destroy your aunt for money. There is a world of difference between those two things. And I suggest you spend the rest of your life contemplating it." Jessica flinched as if he had struck her. She stared at him for a moment, then at me, her expression unreadable. Without another word, she turned and fled, Tom scurrying after her. We were left alone with the mediator and my weeping sister. Mrs. Gable quietly gathered her papers. "My work here is done," she said softly. "I wish you all the best." She gave me a small, compassionate smile before leaving the room, closing the door softly behind her. Now it was just the three of us. Me, Arthur, and Margaret, who was sobbing into her hands. Arthur placed a kind hand on my shoulder. "I'll wait for you outside, Alina," he said, giving my sister a pointed look before he left. I sat in the silence, listening to my sister's grief. I felt a deep, weary sadness, but the guilt that had been my constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. Finally, Margaret looked up at me, her face a mess of smeared mascara and regret. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong. I knew she was taking advantage, but she's my baby. I couldn't say no to her." "I know," I said, and my voice was softer than I expected it to be. "That was always your problem, Margaret. And it was mine, too. We both loved her so much that we forgot to teach her the most important lessons. We gave her everything she wanted, and in the end, we left her with nothing she truly needed. Character, resilience, gratitude. What is she going to do now?" She wailed. "They're going to lose the house. They have nothing." "No," I corrected her gently. "They have each other, they have their health, and they have an opportunity. The same opportunity Robert and I had. The opportunity to build a real life, an honest life from the ground up. It will be hard. It will be humbling. But it might just be the best thing that ever happens to them." I stood up. "I have to go, Margaret." "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, her voice small and filled with fear. "I am still your sister," I said, my hand resting for a moment on the polished table that separated us. "But things will have to be different. Our relationship can't be about Jessica and her needs anymore. If you want to see me, you can call me. You can come to my house. But you must come as my sister, not as her ambassador. And you must come alone." I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. I had left the past where it belonged, behind me. Arthur drove me home, our conversation light and focused on the future. We talked about his grandchildren, about my renovation plans. It was the easy, comfortable chat of two old friends who had just navigated a great storm together. "You were magnificent in there, Alina," he said as he pulled up to my curb. "You were the magnificent one, Arthur," I replied. "Thank you for everything. Not just for the legal advice, but for reminding me who I am." "You never forgot," he said with a smile. "You just needed a little push to act on it." In the months that followed, a new rhythm established itself in my life. A quiet, purposeful, and deeply joyful rhythm. Frank Henderson and his crew finished their work, and my house was transformed. The sage green living room was a peaceful sanctuary. The open-plan kitchen and dining area became the heart of my home, a bright, welcoming space where I started hosting weekly potluck dinners for Beatrice and my other friends. I learned to bake bread, the yeasty smell filling the house with a sense of wholesome abundance. I bought a new floral sofa, a comfortable, beautiful piece that I fell in love with at a local furniture store. As I wrote the check for it, I marveled at the simple, guilt-free pleasure of spending my own money on myself. I took a portion of the funds from the trust, the money that would have been squandered on Jessica's living expenses, and I endowed a scholarship at the local community college for single mothers returning to school. It was named the Robert Parsons Memorial Foundation. It was a foundation that would truly give people a leg up, not a handout. I received a stilted, formal letter from Jessica and Tom a few months after the mediation. It informed me that they had sold the house in Maple Creek Estates at a significant loss, I later heard through the grapevine, and were moving to a small, rented apartment in a less fashionable part of town. Tom was still working, and Jessica, the letter stated, had taken a job as an administrative assistant at a local dental office. The letter contained no apology, but it did contain a single, startling sentence at the end. "We are beginning to understand the value of $1. It wasn't an olive branch, not yet, but it was a tiny, green shoot of self-awareness. I filed the letter away and didn't reply. Margaret did call a few weeks after that. She came over for tea. She didn't mention Jessica once. We talked about our childhoods. We looked through old photo albums. It was awkward and tentative, like learning to walk again after a long illness, but it was a start. She started coming for tea every other Tuesday. One beautiful spring afternoon, about a year after the lawsuit had been settled, I was in my front garden, planting petunias. My house, freshly painted in a cheerful shade of pale blue with crisp white trim, glowed in the sunlight. The porch step was fixed. The gutters were straight. It was a picture of a life well tended. A small, unassuming car I didn't recognize drove down my street, slowed, and then pulled over to the curb. The driver's side door opened, and Jessica got out. She looked different. Her expensive highlights had grown out, her hair a more natural shade of brown. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, not a designer label in sight. She looked thinner, and there were tired lines around her eyes I hadn't seen before, but she also looked solid, more real than she ever had in her cashmere and silk. She didn't come up the walkway. She just stood on the sidewalk, looking at my house. She looked at the new paint, the blooming flowers, the sturdy, welcoming porch. She took it all in, her expression unreadable. Then, she looked at me, kneeling there in the dirt in my old gardening clothes. I stood up slowly, brushing the soil from my knees. We just looked at each other across the expanse of the lawn. She raised a hand in a small, hesitant wave. I was surprised to find that the anger and hurt that had defined our relationship for so long had vanished, leaving only a quiet, calm emptiness. I didn't feel hatred. I didn't feel a rush of forgiveness. I simply felt peace. I had my life back. I was whole. What she did with her own life was no longer my burden to carry. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Not of forgiveness, not of welcome, but of simple recognition. I see you. You are there. I am here. She held my gaze for a long moment, then she got back in her car and drove away. I watched until the car disappeared around the corner. I didn't know if I would ever see her again. I didn't know if she would ever truly understand the depth of the pain she had caused or the strength it had taken for me to survive it, but it no longer mattered. Her judgment, her approval, her very presence in my life had ceased to be the measure of my happiness. I turned back to my garden, picked up my trowel, and plunged it into the rich, dark earth. I had flowers to plant. I had a life to live. And for the first time, it was completely, gloriously, and unapologetically my own. The sun was warm on my back, the scent of damp soil was in the air, and in the comfortable silence of my own yard, I finally understood what prosperity truly meant. It wasn't a number in a ledger or the size of a house. It was the quiet, unshakable piece of a life lived with integrity. A life that was anything but sad.